Men and women of the highways and the byways of this land.
We know that in a couple of weeks' time we're going to win this battle.
As the price of fuel skyrockets and competition increases, truck drivers say their livelihoods and their lives are on the line.
The government has to realise that actually trucking's the backbone of the country.
While the authorities do nothing, the road toll is mounting and drivers are getting increasingly desperate.
If you're going to stand somewhere, let's hit the fuel companies or whatever and do it in 2 days.
Hello, I'm Vivian Schenker. Welcome to Insight. One of the big sleeper issues in Australian politics at the moment is the soaring cost of fuel. How long can the federal government hold out against an electorate convinced it's being exploited at the petrol pump? John Howard insists the international market is responsible and that there's little the government can do to ease the pressure. At the same time, he knows that ignoring the cries of protest could eventually hurt him at the ballot box, particularly in marginal rural seats where prices are highest. But country people aren't the only ones feeling the pinch. Few are suffering more than the truckies, who compete to carry interstate freight. Already burdened by huge debt and demanding deadlines, owner-drivers say fuel prices are bleeding them dry. They claim the impost just adds to the already unbearable pressure in an industry where drugs are necessary to fight fatigue and road fatalities are commonplace. Belinda Hawkins took to the road for this special Insight report. Two trucks crash 43 kilometres south of Narrabri, New South Wales. Both burst into flames. 3 people die. Glenn Jones and his fiancée Tracy Adams were bringing a load from Brisbane to Melbourne. As the trucking fraternity in their hometown gather to mourn, the myth that truckies are tough as rusty nails crumbles. Glenn's father is also a truckie.
You don't get 2 chances when 2 trucks collide, it's head on anyway. But at the end of the day, this is what he's died doing. It's his job, really. That's all he wanted to do, was to drive.
This industry is a sweatshop on wheels, and why is that? It is the most underpaid and overworked industry in Australia. Quite simply, that's it.
1 in 5 crashes involves a truck. Jerry Brown-Sarre has heard about what's happened at Narrabri, but it doesn't stop him working. Like a lot of drivers, he's got 42 wheels to check before he can go anywhere. This is his truck, but he owns very little of it. Along with most of Australia's 20,000 owner-drivers, Jerry's heavily in debt. He's only just making ends meet. The reason? As a subcontractor, he's paid a freight rate that's based on a time when diesel cost 40 cents a litre. It's now at least $1.07. Fuel is by far his biggest cost. But Jerry refuses to give up and is trying to get fellow drivers on board.
No, we're not finished yet. That's why we're still here, because we know that in a couple of weeks' time we're going to win this battle. And then we're back in it. We're away.
If only time would stand still. If only we'd done it was aged.
When he and Margaret married, Jerry was already a truckie.
Dashing bloke I was too.
His father was also a truck driver. It's in his blood. With Jerry away most of the time, Margaret's had to bring up their 2 sons largely on her own.
I feel sick every time he goes away, and I have for 30-odd years. It's just a sinking feeling, and you sort of, like as if you hold your breath until he gets home again. It's always the same. It's never changed.
Why is that?
Because you don't know what's going to happen on the road.
The one thing we don't talk about, we never talk about in this house before I go away, is truck accidents. Never talk about it.
Jerry's taking a double load from Melbourne up to Brisbane. It'll take him at least 20 hours to get there. He's gone from a single trailer to what's called a road train in a bid to make money from the trip.
See you, Dad.
He's leaving from his hometown, Echuca. Because Jerry's hauling such a massive load, he's restricted from driving on stretches of the main highways, so he takes the back roads for part of the way up north. The roads are rougher and the trip takes longer. There are advantages though. Fewer police checking he's not driving too fast or too long. Better still, there are fewer trucks.
The greatest threat is someone going to sleep coming towards me. Not kangaroos, not car drivers, another truck driver. At night time, for instance, you're looking at the headlight against the white line to see where the headlight is, and you're trying to gauge whether he's on the right side of that white line, and you know, it's your biggest worry, it really is.
Current legislation up the eastern seaboard says truckies can't drive more than 72 hours a week and can't work more than 14 hours a day. It's a rule that drivers reckon was made to be broken. Jerry says he doesn't decide how long it will take him to get to Brisbane. The client does. He's got to be there ready to unload by midnight tomorrow.
I don't know if I'm going to get a load back, therefore I've got to assume the fact that I might have to run home empty.
Whatever happens, Jerry's got to pay for fuel to bring his truck home. So to make any money out of this trip, he's got to cut corners.
Like I say, I haven't been an angel in 40 years in this game. I've had the quickest trucks on the road. I've taken a few driving stimulants along the time. I've done all those sort of things, and the only reason we've ever done it is doing a quit.
What does keep you going?
I ask myself that question 50 times a week. Why am I? And it comes back to the same thing. I'm hoping someone's going to fix it for me next week. But I know that it's not going to happen. And I know the only one who's going to fix it is me. And people like me.
The first break is at hay. Here the pump price only ever goes up. Jerry always pays with cash to make sure he's not forking out more than he can afford. The people who work here watch the drivers come in, stay only briefly, and then leave behind evidence of the drugs they're taking, including speed.
It's ridiculous. They don't stop for long enough. When they come in here, you can see how tired they are. The amount of times we pick up syringes in the toilets, it puts us at risk, and I mean they're not doing themselves any good, and we've been having a lot of problem out the back here with speed tablets.
You've got to fix the problem.
Like at the moment I've got to go from Melbourne to Maryborough to Bundaberg in Queensland. Take about 2,200 k's, so 48 hours, you know,
Jerry wants the drivers to stop whinging and take a stand. Blockade the organisations truckies say are causing them grief. Fuel companies, transport companies, and clients who pay low freight rates. Just 2 months ago, he and 9 owner-drivers blockaded 3 fuel distributors in Melbourne, and for a few days raised fears of a fuel shortage. Wherever he goes now, his message is the same.
I can see us winning if we stick together. And whilst there's 20-odd thousand out there at the moment, only 120 are sticking together out of that 20-odd thousand, we hope that the rest will wake up to themselves and join us.
The campaign aside, Jerry's still got to get a load to Brisbane.
I forgot about it yesterday, only got pinched. You know, simple thing. Goes above book. And sometimes I'm human, I forget.
The Road Transport Authority requires drivers to fill in a logbook so it can see that truckies are taking the right amount of rest. Drivers say logbooks are easy to fudge and a waste of time. Last month, the Commonwealth Parliamentary Committee set up to investigate problems facing long-distance drivers like Jerry found that fatigue was the major culprit. But the federal government is reluctant to regulate an industry directed by market forces. Business groups don't want to pay any more for freight than they have to. The more subbies like Jerry, the cheaper the rates. 300 kilometres up the road, and Jerry stops for an hour's kip. It's not much, but it's all he'll get for most of the night. After Jerry unloads in Brisbane, there's nothing for him to bring back, so he drives an extra 800 kilometres to get one load in Bundaberg and then sets off for Melbourne.
Yeah, another accident yesterday up the road. Another truck driver killed in Narrandera.
Oh, you worry about like Sydney side in Narrandera, or?
Don't know, can't find that out yet. You work your ass off. I've just driven 4,000 kilometres. And when I do all the figures, it won't have any profit. I would have paid me way.
Jerry was paid $4,800 to take the double load to Brisbane and $1,100 to bring back a single load from Bundaberg. That's $5,900 to do 5,300 kilometres. In all, he spent $3,200 on fuel. The total outlay for this trip has been $5,823, and that's without paying himself a cent in wages. For his trouble, he's earned only $77, and that's before tax.
How are you feeling now about the sort of action you're proposing?
I can tell you, if it doesn't happen, it won't, because I haven't done anything. I can tell you now, it'll happen. It will happen.
Why is that? Why are you more certain today than you were even last week?
Because it's got to happen. If we say we're not going to work, we don't work. That's it. You can't make us work. And if we control 90% of the freight in Australia, then 90% won't get carted. So, Mr. Ruth, Mr. Howard, whatever's on your table this week, it might be there next week.
Jerry starts a run of meetings up and down the eastern seaboard to talk up the need for owner-drivers to take action.
If we don't do something now...
At the border town of Albury, the numbers are small, but Jerry's confident they'll be bigger in Melbourne next week.
The figure has come out at $1.43 for a full rig operator and $1.26 for a tow operator. Now, as far as we're concerned, that is our final position.
An industry group, which includes the Transport Union, has just drafted a voluntary code of conduct that would see road transport more regulated. That includes paying what's referred to as a sustainable freight rate, a big jump from the rates of around $1 now being paid to subcontractors who undercut each other in a bid to get work.
The employers agree with the principles behind this. They agree with the principles. That doesn't mean to say that they're going to implement it. Their attitude is anything over $1.10 is too high.
I'm of the belief that any action you take, if you're not prepared to put your truck on the line and be prepared to sit there for at least a couple of weeks to get this settled once and for all, and I mean legislated, so no promises can be broken, then you're wasting your time.
Those in favour?
Got to get you a good go.
Yep, so that's unanimous.
While these men are working out what to do, a truck crashes into a tree a short way up the highway. The driver survives, just. With fatigue the likely cause, this is exactly what Jerry is fighting to prevent.
With what I make, and with what I've got to outlay every week, I can't afford to be off the road for more than a week. Maybe even less than that. And I've got to be back on the road to make my payments. Is Jerry Brown going to pay my payments?
So you wouldn't join a blockade?
Can't. I can't afford it. Nor can most owner drivers. What owner driver can afford to put his truck off the road and make up that payment? If you're paying $5,000 a week for your truck, a month for your truck, you've got to make that every week out of your vehicle, every week, to make it viable for you to own that truck.
Charlie is one driver who won't be taking part in any industrial action. He doesn't want to be identified as he fears that in speaking out, he'll never get work again. Charlie doesn't own his own rig, and he's just been sacked from a transport company because he got a load in late when he finally gave in to the need for sleep. After 15 years of surviving on large amounts of amphetamines to keep him awake, he's wide-eyed and wired up.
Do 7,000 kilometres without stopping, without sleeping, looking at what, 96 hours, staying awake. Just not only just doing the job, but also finding your loads, finding your freight, loading your freight, unloading your freight, and being there, because you're trying to do the right thing by a boss. Your mind starts playing tricks on you.
How far did it drive you to, nearly?
Well, probably about 10, 15 minutes off to suicide.
Are you fit to drive now?
Personally, no. I don't think I am. But, yeah, I'll have to be back out there. I've got a family to feed. It's all I've done. Since I was a kid. You know? Too young to quit and too old to change.
Now he's home, Charlie seems like any other dad. But he says his body's screaming out for drugs, which cost him $7,000 a year. A doctor gives him prescriptions for weight loss tablets that contain amphetamines. More often than not, he takes pure amphetamine. It's illegal, but he gets it easily enough on a black market run by truckies.
A gram of pure, you can look at $200 to $350. And a quarter of cut stuff, $250 to $350 to $400, depending on how scarce it's getting. Further north you go, the more expensive it gets.
How many grams would you be taking once you're starting to take it?
You can use it, 1 gram, anything from 1 gram to what they call an 8 ball, which is 3.5 grams a week. Even more than that if you have to. The more you do, the more you need. It's like a dog chasing its tail. There's no saying out there. I'd rather a driver coming at me with a guts full of gear than a driver coming at me thinking he's going to make the next Barking Bay with nothing in him. Because at least we know the guy coming at you has got his eyes open.
Charlie's a typical long-distance truck driver. He's living in the country area where there's very little jobs, very few jobs for his profession, and he's the sort of bloke that he needs a job to survive. So what's happened, he's at the mercy of the owners of the company. He drives under their conditions or he doesn't drive. The company said, I want you to drive further, longer, be there quicker. So what he does, he starts to take drugs and then he starts to break every law that's around, and eventually people like him end up getting killed or killing somebody else.
Greg Hooper is an investigator working for the victims of truck crashes in compensation claims. He meets drivers like Charlie every day, the drivers who survive wrecks like this in an industry that's become drug dependent.
These blokes are not really in this world, but they're driving trucks and they're driving at speeds of 100 k's an hour plus, and they're pulling 60, 70 tonne of freight behind them. And they're dangerous, and he would be dangerous. He shouldn't be on the road. He is a person who, any tick of the clock could go off the planet and become a real problem.
Well, he's a time bomb.
He's a time bomb, yeah.
Charlie knows he's playing Russian roulette with his life and that of others on the road, but he's determined to get back in a truck. If nothing else, he's still a hero to his son, who desperately wants to be a truckie one day. But his wife sees things differently. Do you want to see him back on the road?
No.
Why?
Because I worry.
What do you worry about?
What's going to happen next time all this happens?
What's your worst fear?
I can't. I just worry that next time this happens he might really kill himself. Not come home.
Who or what do you blame?
Probably myself, most of all. If you're allowed that. I mean, I'm the one that's, like they say, you're the one in charge of the key. Yeah, you are. But I'm also the one that's responsible to feed my family.
Drug use in this industry has become so blatant that at least one transport company has issued tips in its newsletter on how best to use them. Where does the buck stop with someone like Charlie if he goes back on the road, and if he either hurts himself or hurts someone else?
The Charlies on this road are a product of the people at the other end who want freight moved at the bare minimum freight amount they can get it on the road at. And it's basically got to go back to them. And ultimately it's got to come back to the government, because the government's got to say, well, look, there's got to be a point where a trucking company, or what goes on the road, has to be on the road at X amount of cents per kilometre. And it has to, and that's the minimum. And nobody can go under that.
All too often, drivers who've been on the road all night spend long hours waiting in queues to drop off or pick up a load.
As you can see, you've got to keep moving your truck up and down, you know, and you've got to follow. You go to sleep, the bloke behind me is going to go round me.
Well, my time slot's 5. What time's it now?
It's
That's 2 hours.
it's after 7, yeah.
Yeah, so it's 2 hours already wasted, so...
Why do you keep going then?
Because I'm an idiot. It's about the size of it, and no fuss, what else do I do? I've been driving trucks for 20 years now, so what do you do? So there you go, get a new job, become a brain surgeon overnight.
Big retail outlets use and often run centres like this, but argue they're not to blame for driver fatigue. Drivers are. If more got out of the industry, there'd be less competition and more money to go around.
The realities are that the retailers, when they enter into a trucking contract, and in most cases there aren't a great deal of trucking contracts that they do enter into, they do so on the basis that all legal obligations are going to be met, and they then make a decision on the basis of the best price. Now, the fact that in some cases that may not be adhered to down the many levels of the chain that exists in the industry is a concern to us, but at the same time it's not our responsibility.
Every person in the chain of command of road transport who uses it, from the person who, the farmer, or to the retailer who makes the bit of plastic that goes onto something, has a duty of care. The rate he pays to shift his freight has a road safety component in it. I use truck drivers, so I suppose I'm guilty of trying to keep them squeezed to minimum rates.
What would happen if freight rates rose for you? What would effect would that have on you?
If they pass on the cost of fuel, which I suppose most businesses would try to do, that would have an impact on the profitability of my business.
Paul Weller runs 350 dairy cows not far from Echuca, where Jerry lives. The farm has been in his family for 2 generations and is doing well. To increase milk production, Paul has to bring in a grain mixture that supplements the pasture feed. He's got to get the milk out of here twice a day. He's totally reliant on truckies, and talk of truck drivers like Jerry taking action concerns him.
In the end, if there's no diesel gets into the country and they don't come and deliver to me or take away from me, it shuts us down. Yeah.
Paul's biggest outlay is transport, with fuel the biggest component of that. Like the truckies, his business is being hard hit by the ever-increasing government tax on fuel and the skyrocketing cost of diesel.
If one truck driver's cheaper than the other one, well, provided he gives the same service and that you don't believe that he's going to tip the truck over on the way here because he's doing things illegal, you opt for that way.
Ultimately, isn't that kind of competition in a tight market the sort of thing that leads to drivers doing dangerous things on the road to keep afloat?
Well, that's why we believe that we should be looking at the taxes that are on fuel and that they shouldn't be continued to be indexed and put up every 3 months because the CPI's gone up, because it's the flow-on effect from the farm to the truck. Everything's got to go the other way to the consumer as well, and you can't necessarily push it on.
Well, I can tell you now, the days of the farmer getting his freight carted cheap are gone, well and truly. And the farmer better get used to the fact that he's going to pay the right rate to shift his goods to or from his farm. Let me tell you that the Echuca farmer at the moment, for example, he's getting more handouts from the federal government than the Echuca truckie has ever or will ever get. And I'm afraid if it's between him or me, he goes, I'll stay.
If the government won't stand up and recognise the problems that the industry's got and do something about it, and do something about the fuel companies that are loading the price of fuel so high, somebody with the guts that Jerry Brown's got has got to stand up and try and do something.
A blockade, a truck blockade.
A truck blockade shouldn't be needed, but I think it is.
Even though it would tear a country town like this apart?
We've got to survive that. We've got to go through that.
Keith Harvey and his wife know all too well what owner-drivers are going through. He was a truckie until they sold out and went into a machinery business in Echuca 15 years ago.
They've got nothing to sell but the steel that they're sitting in, steel and plastic. That's all they've got to sell, and nobody wants it because they can't. No one else can make a living either. So they're between the devil and the deep blue sea. If they get out, they're going to walk away from it and let the finance company have it that'll sue them for everything else they got anyhow.
Yeah, only way you're going to win this is with an industrial campaign, I'm telling you. You're only going to get it if you want to do a campaign. If you want to do it with the union's blessing and the union's backing, you're going to have to all join the union. That's where I'm coming from.
Jerry's holding another meeting with owner-drivers, this time in Melbourne, and this time with help from the Federal Secretary of one of the country's most powerful unions, the Transport Workers Union.
If you want us to negotiate an outcome, fine. That's our job, we're bloody good at it. If you want a realistic outcome, we've got to do it with your support.
This is history in the making. Until now, the self-made men of the transport industry have rejected the union with its regulations and consensus decision-making.
You've done nothing over the years, right? Now, we'll come again, because I hope hell that something gets done.
If you want to go back in the history of the relationship with owner-drivers and the union, it's shit. That's what it was. You didn't like us and we didn't like you. How more honest can you be with that? We've come a long way since May. If you want to go back, let's go back and argue the old days. In the old days, you used to get paid right.
No, I know for a fact, well, you can't expect everyone else to go off when we won't. But if we're going to really show some strength, we need some support from the union in the end. And I don't mean at the start, I mean at the end. Like, if we're going to stand out there for a week, I'm not into this standing out in the road for a month. That's bullshit. You're going to stand somewhere, let's get the fuel companies or whatever and do it in 2 days.
Yeah, how many owner drivers have joined the union at this point in time?
2/5 of bugger all.
We'll ask the question, how many's prepared to join the union?
It's got to be your call, it's got to be your conscience, it's got to be your decision. Now, hang on a sec. I've had a cupful of this. If we get results, I'll join. Well, I can tell you, piss off.
Caught in the crossfire, Jerry continues his campaign without the union and looks to the community for support.
I'm not a great person on protests. I'd most probably run. But if they don't do what they're doing, nobody's going to take any notice of them.
May Black and her family have seen the worst side of the transport industry. Her first husband died in a trucking accident 10 years ago. Her son died when the truck he was in overturned.
I don't think Gareth ever stopped being loving me, and I never stopped loving him because he just reminded us so much of his dad. He was determined, strong, obnoxious, but he was one of the best sons you could ever want to have.
Men and women of the highways and the byways of this land, your lives were spent on one more load to haul. But as long as we remember you, you'll never ever die. Yes, as long as your name's upon the wall.
May and another son, who's also a truckie, make the trip up to Tarcutta, where there's a truck driver's memorial. This is the halfway point between Melbourne and Sydney on the infamous Hume Highway.
Our loved ones shared a passion for big rigs. For many it was the only life they knew. And yet often they found themselves economically entrapped in a struggle for survival. Quick turnarounds, long loading queues, little sleep, endless stretches of highway, impossible deadlines. And then, in a terrible split second of lapsed concentration or moment of misjudgment, and the awful toll is wrought for those left behind.
You want to fix it, you're not going to fix it today because no one has got any balls to do anything. I want 50 trucks. I want 30 minimum to start it. We haven't got it.
This is Jerry Brown-Sarre's last stand. His call to front up has drawn only 15 owner-drivers, but some of them are anxious to blockade at least 3 fuel distributors in the hope their number and capacity to wreak havoc will increase.
Probably we should take a view from the tippers and fucking get it underway, you know, and go to fucking break.
Shut down 2 companies.
Eh?
2 companies. Even 2 companies if we are doing blockade.
Oh, so you want to just close the companies down there?
Yeah, just 2 companies. Tomorrow maybe another more and more. We are do something, starting.
Have you got the numbers? If you haven't got the numbers, you can't do it. Do you want to come back tomorrow and see if you've got the numbers?
Nah, we are doing now.
6 o'clock tonight. If they're here, we can do something.
Yep.
If they're not here, we can't.
Yeah, we are doing tonight.
All right? All those in favour of that, hands up. Let me have a look at it. Support. Gives us a chance. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's unanimous. It's 6 o'clock tonight. All trucks involved and your mates that you know of, here. If you can draw up next to 20 by then, here. And we go and shut them down. All right, there it is. 6 o'clock tonight.
By 6 o'clock, the passion has died away. Many of the drivers don't front. Jerry makes the long drive back to Echuca, bitterly disappointed that his campaign to stem the carnage has failed, at least for the time being.
When you go away, when you say goodbye to your missus, say, well, it's like going to war. I might be home Thursday. Once upon a time we'd say, see you Tuesday, and be pretty confident. Now you say, see you Tuesday, maybe. You don't know who's going to come across the white line at you. If you want to fix it, only people can fix it are those in the industry.
Belinda Hawkins with that report. So what are the answers? What do we need to do to improve the health and safety of the truckies and everyone else who uses the roads? Well, joining me now in the studio, Jerry Brown-Sarre, the owner-driver who featured in our story tonight, Andrew Higginson, Chief Executive Officer of the Australian Trucking Association, and Tony Sheldon, New South Wales Secretary of the Transport Workers Union. Also joining us from Canberra, National Party MP Stuart St Clair, probably the only former truckie in Parliament and therefore an eminently qualified member of its recent inquiry into fatigue in the trucking industry. Welcome to you all. Stuart St Clair, the truckies in our story paint a pretty bleak picture. Is the industry in a state of crisis?
Vivian, I think one of the things that's happened is that the truckies need some advocates down here in the Parliament. There's very few, as you mentioned.
They've got you, Stuart.
Yeah, they've got very few ex-truckies down here, let me tell you. But one of the things we've been able to do is work with a group of the owner-drivers at that level, bring them into the Parliament, put them in front of committees and also with the ministers, and make sure that the views at that level are heard at the highest level of government.
Tony Sheldon, in your opinion, is the industry in a state of crisis? How bad are things?
Well, we've had 2 increases in fatalities in the last, between the last 2 years. We've seen a lot more truck drivers go bankrupt. We're seeing a lot more fatalities and injuries, and we're seeing yet another government report come out and say that a voluntary code is going to protect somebody.
Andrew Higginson, crisis?
Wouldn't call it crisis, I'd say there's tough times. There are issues that need to be addressed. I think to go forward, you've got to look where you've come from. Over the last 10 years, we've seen over a 50% reduction in fatalities involved in this industry. The recent changes, tough economic times, all those things are impacting at the moment, and I think they're issues that we've got to address together. I don't think it's anyone's fault, but they're things we've got to work on together.
OK, we'll touch on some of those issues you raise in a minute, but Jerry Brown-Sarre, how bad are things? The worst you've ever seen?
Worst in 40 years I've been in this business, and quite bluntly, now is the time to fix them, not next month, not next year, now, this week, and we believe it can be fixed in 72 hours if the parties of owner-drivers, union and the government get together. And I'm quite blunt where I want to go on this. We want a code of conduct which the government have helped draw up. We want a sustainable rate that the government helped draw up, and we want that incorporated into the Interstate Transport Act Section 5, which is laying there dormant. We want that assented. That can be done in 3 days, we believe, with some intelligent men sitting down, and we can fix this industry, and we can save this country hundreds of millions of dollars a year in road trauma just by fixing the problems that you saw in that program before.
Can I ask you, Stuart St Clair, is more regulation the answer?
I don't think it is. In fact, I think voluntary codes are the way to go. I think one of the reasons for that, really, Vivian, and I know Jerry and I might disagree on this, but one of the things is you can get far more in there with a cohesive voluntary code than you'll ever get in a
purely prescriptive code, and that's what we want to try and stay away from. But I do agree with Jerry, and I agree with the drivers that I'm working with, Graham, Patton and a few of the others, and with John Allen from the union, that we need to have a group together, a very cohesive, both government, owner drivers, the union, and of course the Trucking Association itself. And I think that's a good start, and that's what we've been doing.
Well, Stuart, I mean, the fine point about having a voluntary code, but the reality is we do have a voluntary code out there now, and we actually have some laws out there now that are supposed to be saying that drivers are only supposed to be driving 14 hours, 72 hours a week. There's codes out there at the moment that say that they're supposed to be occupational health and safety, that the retailers are responsible for providing a certain degree of responsibility. But the reality is the codes don't go far enough and people aren't enforcing it. And that means a lack of government action, a lack of client action, and the fact that the economic situation out there in the trucking industry means that the cheapest and the nastiest operator will more often than not get the job.
Andrew Higginson, isn't it patently obvious that a voluntary code isn't working? I mean, we've seen drivers talking about fiddling their books or forgetting, as in Jerry's case in the story. I mean, under that sort of pressure. I mean, isn't it reasonably clear that the voluntary code isn't working?
Vivian, the voluntary code hasn't even come in yet. It's only been drafted over the last few months, and groups
but
like
if it's voluntary as opposed to regulation, why would anybody adhere to it any more than they adhere to the current
You've only got to listen to Tony saying regulation doesn't work now, so I don't know why Tony and Jerry necessarily think regulation is going to work in the future. We've got to go to the symptoms, and people have got to look at what they are in terms of addressing the problem. Why have we got bad business skills in this industry? Why have we got people doing what they're doing? Let me finish, Tony. Let me finish. I'll listen to you.
Yep.
Why have we got customers who openly flout what they're meant to do? And Tony and Jerry, Stuart and I agree on those issues, but that's what this code's all about. For the first time ever, we're engaging our customers in a debate to lift the standard of the transport service they get. We've got transport companies out there now working with customers, showing endemic safety problems across their industry. They're getting rate increases. I don't think there is a 72-hour fix. I think this is a generational change we're going through, and we've got to do the tough yards from an industry perspective as well as from a customer perspective.
Okay,
well, I mean, the reality of it is economic pressure and the free market forces in the economy are saying what happens in the transport industry. You know, major retailers in this country refuse to sit down in a sensible way with the transport industry when it comes to dollars and cents and having a fair, sustainable rate for an owner driver. They refuse to pay. And as we saw from the Retail Traders Association during the program tonight, they've restated again, it is not their responsibility. They will not take responsibility for the fact that people are dying out there on the road. And they are dying out there on the road delivering their goods. And there's numerous examples directly against those companies.
Stuart Sinclair, isn't it obvious that in a free market the customers will want to do it as cheaply as they can?
Oh, absolutely, Vivian. But I think the thing is, and Tony and others have alluded to this problem of rates versus, returns on investment, if you like, has been going on for 40 years. I mean, fatigue, one of the things we found in our inquiry, which very importantly found that focus on fatigue. Fatigue was there, and it's been there for many, many years, as you know, because over the period of time, while the trucks are now more powerful, they're much more easier to drive, etc., you've still got this question of people being pushed beyond the 14 hours or the 12 hours, Vivian, and that's where the problem is, because the majority of truck drivers, professional truck drivers, are being asked to do work over and above the sort of hours that they're supposed to do.
Why is that?
Well, I think one of the reasons is just in time has been a problem that a lot of our freight and a lot of our storage in Australia has ended up on the backs of trucks. I mean, I think that's where the issue is, that people are saying out there, look, don't worry about the damn truckie. What we'll do is put our stock on the truck and we'll make sure that it just arrives in time.
I think the government's losing the plot here, mate. I'm sorry to tell you. Look, if you want to fix these problems, you got to do four things. You got to stop the need to overload, the need to speed, the need to drive while fatigued, the need to drive with drugs. You've got to stop those. The only way you're going to stop all those things is to make the strongest laws possible. And I revert what I said before. In the last month alone, we've had 3 triple truck accidents. Father and son in one, a guy and his fiancée in another, plus another driver, 3 in that one accident, and 2 more the other week. In 1 week last month, 1 week, 14 trucks roll over. In 1 week. This has got to stop. You're just killing the drivers. Until the government take responsibility, and the government have a duty of care, not next month,
not next year, have a duty of care to fix this problem now.
So
we can't wait.
What are you talking about, Jerry, when you talk about regulation? Are you talking about legally enforceable minimum freight rates? Is that what you mean?
You must have it, because out there now they say, oh, there's a market out there. What you got out there now is a market that's full of abuse. Section 46A of the trade practices, 51AB of the trade is being abused every day by every contractor out there who hires a subcontractor. The ACCC, we've been there with evidence. That's a toothless tiger. They won't touch them. The facts are there.
Okay, well, let's hear the answer to that. Andrew Higginson, how do you feel about a legally enforceable minimum freight rate? Surely that would stop people squeezing truck drivers to get the price down.
That's one issue I'd stay away from. The Australian
well, okay, I want to talk about that one, though.
That's fine. The Australian Trucking Association doesn't deal with the industrial issues, it deals with the industry issues, and Tony and the industrial partners deal with those industrial issues.
Okay, well,
and they come to that agreement on the thing. No one disagrees with what Jerry's saying, and I think you'll get industry people around the table unanimously agreeing to everything he says, and the personal level, you can't argue with that. But what we can do by working together is start getting these customers around the table. And for the first time, and I've been in this industry not as long as you, but for a decade or more.
But I don't understand why you have to get them around the table. Stuart Sinclair, why can't you tell them that they cannot go below a certain amount of money, because below a certain amount of money, you know from experience that you will be pushing the drivers too hard?
Yeah, I think one of the issues really, Vivian, that the industries, and it's the whole of the industry, that people just can't look to governments to solve the problem. I mean, one of the issues that's brought up in the program that you had before, just hang on a second, Tony, one of the issues you had on before was this question of fuel prices and the way that fuel prices have gone through the roof, and they have, and we know that. But one of the things that's not being given recognition is the fact that this particular government has cut fuel excise by 26 cents a litre. And what worries the life out of me, Tony, more than anything, and Jerry, is the amount of drivers that I come across, owner-driver guys, that actually don't realise that they're entitled to get another 17 cents a litre off their prices.
Tony.
And I think one of the things is the days of buying a job are gone, and I think the issue is there that drivers and professional drivers, and Jerry, you're one of them. You're one of them. I saw the light and got out and came down to this place instead. But one of the issues that we've got to do is to come up as a much more professional industry. And I really do congratulate, quite honestly, the majority of drivers that are out there looking at their business through different eyes.
Tony.
Well, reality is you can have a professional industry, but when you've got a third of the drivers that are taking drugs as a result of client pressures, when you've got fatalities increasing in the last 2 years, and you've got someone saying to us a voluntary code is all of a sudden going to make a client pay a bigger amount in the negotiating table with an owner-driver. When you're dealing with a major retailer, it's like an ant dealing with an elephant, and ants get squashed.
Okay, can I ask you about another tack? Is it possible that there are just too many owner-operators, that there are just too many trucks?
6 months ago, 6 months ago I would have said yes, but the rate they're going out of the industry now, and I'm not saying one or two, I'm saying 20, 30 a week that are losing trucks by repossession or handing them back or rolling them over and killing themselves, and they're going out of this industry that quick at the moment in all those different ways that the way it's going, in 3 months' time you won't have an industry. And if that happens, the whole of Australia's going to suffer. Without a subcontractor part of the component of this industry, and there's thousands and thousands of them, you haven't got an industry. And that's what you've got to worry about.
Tony,
if that doesn't happen.
Tony, the union's keen on regulation. How about licensing of owner-operators of truck drivers? Keep the numbers down like we do with taxi drivers.
Well, the interesting thing is that in the American situation and a recent inquiry, which is an inquiry that's taking place at the moment, the Quinlan inquiry, Martin Belzer from the US is a well-known expert. He said that there's been a substantial reduction in US vehicles, numbers of vehicles available. However, the rate for trucks and for trucking is still on the decline. Clients aren't prepared to pay unless they're forced to pay. And what's happening is that trucks are having to do a lot more work, a lot longer hours, a lot more stress in their situation. I can't see why Australia would be any different in a lot of the government's position.
Andrew Higginson?
No disagreement with Tony in that sense. We've got to build a value back into our industry that includes the safety side of things.
Absolutely.
And I think we all agree, we just don't agree on the timing or the way to do it. The chain of responsibility legislation has been built right across Commonwealth law now, but unfortunately we've only had one prosecution by governments in this country picking up that legislation.
That's a state issue, isn't it, largely?
The enforcing the legislation comes out and they haven't been able to change their own culture in terms of picking up this legislation and making it work. Once we get a few of those prosecutions, we move one step. But that's not the only thing. The code of conduct, people say voluntary versus compulsory. Let's give the voluntary one a go, get some customers and operators signed up and get people into it, so we can say, well, if you don't sign up, it clearly indicates that you don't want to operate safety, so we can start identifying those people. All these things start adding up to give us a result. Legislation, we've said legislation doesn't work and hasn't worked, and you're saying legislation is the answer.
Wait a minute, Wednesday last week, there was a code of practice which has been in existence for some considerable time for outworkers, which are exploited Australian workers that get paid $2 an hour on average, have the whole families working. A voluntary code the retailers were party to. They've just broken it. They said they refuse now to participate in it. And it's the exact same sort of code issues that you're saying that the federal government and you are going to deliver from those retailers. Or when there's a financial impact on them, when it affects their profits, they'll say, blow the lives, we want our profits. That's the reality of what happens out there in the market.
Stuart Sinclair?
Yeah, I don't necessarily agree with Tony, although I do understand the thrust of what he's talking about. I again get back to this situation where the industry is one of the greatest employers of people in this industry. We're going to suffer a very great shortfall, as people know, of professional truck drivers in a period of time, and we're doing that now. As Jerry's saying, guys are going out hand over fist, if you like, out of the industry, and we're going to end up with a crisis situation. But mandating or regulating or whatever you want to call it, or legislating, is not the answer. What we've got to have, in my opinion, is an accreditation system. Is the government, which I'm pushing to do, is to get them to bring all those players to the table and sit them down and say, now look, if it's not organised... But I think the thing is, Tony, really, if that was Tony...
No, it was Jerry.
Jerry, if you have a look back in 1983 at the report that was given to the government at the time, the same issues that we're talking about tonight were the same issues back in 1983, as you guys know. And what you're doing for the first time, just half a second, for the first time, honestly, Jerry, you've actually got your people inside this place down here, sitting down at the table with the transport ministers, including, and can I say this, Tony, including John Allen, who I've got to say has been an exceptionally great leader in this issue, of sitting down saying, these are the issues. Now, I don't think before there has ever been a transport minister over the years, and I honestly say this, over 25 years, that's actually ever sat in a room with an actual owner-driver,
Okay, Jerry.
They've never done that before, and they're doing it now.
Look, that's fair enough as it may be, but the facts are, if you want to solve the problems of this industry, and I'm talking road safety for all truck owners, all truck drivers and motorists of Australia, then the government have a duty of care to do it now. And I say the only way to do it is to make the current code voluntary, incorporate into Section 5 of that Act that Peter Morris set back in 1986. It's been sitting in there, hasn't been dissented. Bring it in, and with a sustainable rate part of it, and I'll guarantee you that will control every part of the benefits of this country. Will stop all those major law breaking that's going on now, but that guys have got to do. But if you don't control the rate, you've got nothing. The voluntary...
Jerry, you're right, and I'm not disputing that. And you've got, as you know, mandated rates in Victoria. You've got some mandated rates in New South Wales. Exactly. But the issue that's still got to come back is that owner-drivers who are out there negotiating rates, whether it was some of the major contractors or not, have still got to look. You are able to negotiate a rate, Jerry. You're able to do it.
There is no fair marketplace.
Yeah.
Andrew, can I ask you here, how optimistic are you that this time we'll get something done?
Well, as I said, it's a range of issues. I think the code is a great step forward, and as other people around the table have said, getting the customer to the table has been the key issue. It's something we haven't been able to do as an industry before. Whether it works or not, well, that's up to us to enforce it.
And when you say, sorry, getting the customer to the table, you mean down the line you're going to have to convince consumers that they may have to pay extra for their goods?
Well, that, and I think the efficiency we can deliver. We've done projects that show by improving, you saw those trucks lining up in lines in the program before, by improving their efficiency we actually deliver products to them. One of the old industry fathers went into a meeting with some of his customers today and said, look, we're not about blaming anyone, but the only way we're going to get a better result in this area is work together. Let's get off our butts and do it together. And that's customer talking to transport driver. I've never heard it before.
Okay, we're virtually out of time, Tony.
Well, quite clearly, those must be different customers than what owner-drivers talk to, because they're the same ones that are demanding rate decreases. Just today, we've had a major transport company that's demanded a further 7.6% decrease as a result of client demands. quite clearly, when you've got a third of the industry taking drugs because a client demands, you've got 1,500 people injured or killed in the last 12 months in New South Wales, to say that a government bringing protective legislation in is inappropriate, we should have a voluntary code, is criminal.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you all very, very much for taking part.
I'm going to continue to work, Vivian, just with the transport industry, believe me, as an advocate down here.
Okay, thank you all very much.
Thanks, Vivian.
And that's our program for tonight. Next week on Insight, the cutting edge of the music revolution on the internet. How computer nerds bypass the multinational record companies and get music for free.
If anyone wants to get my music for free, it's going to contradict what the record companies think, but I don't care.
The internet has changed the business world, and now it's set to change the music world as well.
It is theft, copyright theft. If they do it too much, then bands won't make money, and